Hi, I'm happy to be here. I'm the State Broadband Policy Coordinator. I work with Ellen Katz, and very psyched about broadband. I think this is a great day, and I'm so happy that everybody came today. I'm going to call the mayors up. We're going to start the mayors panel. I think all the mayors are here?
Yes.
Yes. So if you'd come up, I think the panel will be seated here. I see people jumping into action. Oh, yes, with the mayors and the state senator. Why don't I start the bios so that they can settle themselves, and I'm just going to introduce the folks. There are formal bios in the packet, but I'll start with Mayor Toni Harp, who is here. She was state senator, chair of the Senate Chair of Appropriations, which meets in this room, and there's so many members of that committee that they wind up sitting out here too. But in that position, she had our budget, so she was smart and tough on our budget. She's the 50th mayor of New Haven. She's twice elected since 2013 with landslide majorities each time. She has a background in urban planning, and along with Mayor Martin of Stamford, New Haven was among the first of 3 towns. We did an RFQ in 2014 and 46 towns joined that RFQ, and we had a number of proposals, and it really started the ball rolling with municipalities thinking in terms of, well, you know, how do we get this in town? And since that time, I like to say that the question that mayors have when I speak to them is no longer, you know, what's broadband? They've had their what's broadband moment. It's now, how do I get it, and what's the process? Let's make this happen. And I commend Mayor Harp on, there's been a lot of heat over the years, but she's always stood up to it and led the way. Mayor David Martin, you'll see his bio in there as well, and Stamford, as I mentioned, was a member of the RFQ back then. The mayor was on the Board of Representatives for the city for 26 years, 8 years as president, 2 in the Board of Finance. If you see his educational CV, you'll see that he has a great academic background, and he knows his stuff, and when he digs in on things like broadband, he can get that done. Mayor Marcia Leclerc is here. You just heard from Rich Keogh, who's her associate in running East Hartford. She's been the mayor since 2011. She's a lifelong resident of East Hartford. And she demonstrated her enthusiasm and understanding of broadband to Ellen and I quite well last winter when they were interviewing and dealing with a company called Sci-Fi Technologies, which builds fiber networks and runs and basically set up a fiber roadway, and on that would be a competitive level of ISPs. And the mayor really led that charge along with Mike Walsh, who was sitting here as well, the CFO, to make that happen. And they had a unanimous vote. Ellen and I were there until midnight one night in December to aid that effort, and I'm delighted it happened. Last but certainly not least is State Senator Beth, who has been a huge ally of Ellen and mine's for all these years. Her bio and the state legislature, which isn't in the package, says she is a moving force in bringing high-speed broadband internet access to Connecticut, and I can definitely second that. So she's had first-hand experience getting this done, and we're very grateful for her calm and collected demeanor no matter what is flying at us. And she just had 66% of the vote on Tuesday. So I'll introduce the group, and I'm glad they're here. Beth will be the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning. We are so lucky to have these 3 mayors with us today. I'm going to start with some opening comments, and then I have some questions for you that I know you've prepared for. So we're really grateful that you're here. So my name is Beth. I'm a state senator representing 4 towns in Connecticut, from a sort of urban suburb right through a very rural town. So we see the impact on communities of broadband. I want to start by thanking Ellen Katz and Bill Vallee. You have been dogged. Josh used that word. You are dogged in your pursuit of high-speed broadband for consumers. They're here for the consumers, and I noticed DCP is here as well. And if you keep consumers at the center, which is, I know what our mayors do, they're trying to think of their constituents, I think you look at this a little differently. My involvement began because I had a constituent who was trying to start a competitive company against some of the incumbents, and he was unable to get access to the polls and gave up and donated the system to the town of West Hartford, saying, I can't fight this battle anymore. I can't put any more money into this. It's too hard. And so I worked on a bill that basically said municipalities can use their line on the pole, their municipal gain, for any purpose. After which the incumbents went to PURA to say, that's not what the bill was supposed to mean. But I can tell you the intent of the bill was to allow communities to develop public-private partnerships or ways in which they could spur economic development using high-speed broadband. It's really critical for economic development. The funniest thing happened this morning. I'm down in the cafeteria getting my coffee, and I had a text from my son. And I just wanted you to say what he said to me. I had told him that about Go NetSpeed, which is a competitor in West Hartford. And he works at a small IT company in Glastonbury, but he's not able to work from home because of the speeds. It would cost him more than $300 a month. So he sent me the difference in speeds once he got Go NetSpeed up. He sent me like a picture. I said, I don't know what that means. But I can tell you he's gone from a download Mbps, which he explained to me, but you may know, but the speed in which he can download of 279 to 452. But the big thing for him is the upload was from 12.01 to 568. He said it's a game changer for him. So it cost 1/3 as much as that would cost him. But when I walked in here today, because I told you I got involved because my constituent couldn't get up on the polls. I walked in and the gentleman from Go NetSpeed said he just filed a claim with PURA because guess what? They can't get on the polls to expand this in West Hartford and other places. So I think what's happened broadly, and then I'm going to ask my question, is that most public-private partnerships, it's a big thing I know for you who work in municipalities, it's a really helpful tool. Most public-private partnerships are when there's a public good or a public service that's being delivered, but it gets really challenging and hard to do. So mayors and councils look to private companies to come help them do that. And then it works well because the public has the money to do the program and they want to have it done better or they want to take some of their burden off and then they turn to a private company to help them. The challenge with broadband is the way it was developed in the nation to start was private. So it's really hard to turn a private into a public-private. But our communities depend on some of these services to take the next step and turn a corner from an economic development point of view. And in Connecticut, broadband infrastructure is every bit as important as our transportation infrastructure. We are a state of innovation. We have some of the most insurance tech companies. We have, and Mayor Harp has this in her town, the bioscience sector is growing. Connecticut had the 4th most patents in the country. And I know Jackson Labs said to me, it would be a game changer if we could have this high-speed broadband in a way that was affordable. Rather than ship discs to China, we could be on and do it. So if Connecticut wants to continue to be the state of innovation, we've got to crack this nut. We've got to allow for competition to allow companies to have choices. And I think municipalities are a big part of that because they are little economic hubs and they understand what their own industries need. So we have to find a way for municipalities to do it and then to connect to each other. So those are just my opening comments, and I'm really glad to be here. I'm going to start with Mayor Harp. Mayor Harp, tell us a little bit about your community's work and concerns around high-speed broadband and why this is important for New Haven.
Sure. Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Beth Bai. And can we just congratulate Beth for winning again? Let's give her a round of applause. You know, I first want to thank Josh Elliott and admire him for coming into the General Assembly and recognizing how important this is. And I want to thank Ellen Katz and Bill Vallee for the work that they've done to support our community for 4 years. I came here after having first been elected a mayor, after having served here for nearly 20 years. And I came to what was the predecessor for this conference. I believe that, Beth, you put it on. And I heard about all of the wonderful things that are going on in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I thought to myself, Chattanooga, Tennessee can have broadband and access to that, and New Haven, Connecticut, a state at that time that was 375 years old, cannot. When we have some of the most preeminent colleges, both public as well as private, in the country, and I thought to myself, I felt like that kid who opened her Christmas present and didn't get the Mickey Mouse that was the big deal that year. How is it that we can be such an important state, such an old state, and not have the infrastructure that we need? And I was struck by what Senator Bai said. She said, well, you know, this is one that started in the private sector. Well, roads started pretty much privately, water started privately, sewer, electricity did. But when we recognized that it was something that was for the common good, then we made sure that it became a utility that was accessible to everyone. And that's what we've got to do with this important resource, broadband, that will take us from where we are now into the future. And we absolutely, as a person who is a baby boomer, I will confess, the world in which our young people live, the way in which they communicate, the way in which they're taught is altogether different than the way in which I learned and I was taught. And oftentimes people who are making decisions about these things are people who are thinking about it from their perspective and are really far behind the curve of where our children are, where our grandchildren are, and where we need to be as an economy. So what we've done in New Haven is that we recognize that this is something that we absolutely need. And so we moved forward, we did an RFP, we were moving forward, and then we ran into a roadblock. And so where we are today, the roadblock absolutely stopped us, because we are competing with businesses that are making a lot of money doing this, and it's really not in their interest to see, as I care, that everyone in my community, whether they be rich or poor, have access to this real, what I would call knowledge-based enhancer, available to just a few. As an African American, I've got to tell you, I've seen through my lifetime where education has been denied to my people. I've seen how in our urban areas over time that education hasn't been as good as it's been in other places, but to not have this tool available to young people really puts my people, who are largely the poor people throughout our state, back to where they were in the 40s and the 50s, and it's absolutely a fairness issue. What we're doing, though, we've recognized that we have invested, and I've got to give Daryl Jones, my IT as well as controller, all the props for this. We've recognized that the state has invested in broadband and in fiber. And what we want to be able to do is to connect all of those together in something that we call the middle mile. I can talk a little bit more about that, but if we can begin to look at the public fiber that is there, that is in the ground, make that connection, and then spread it out into those communities that are underserved, we believe that we can find a way to move this whole initiative forward. We know that it will be a fight, but it's a fight worth undertaking.
Thank you, Mayor Harp, for your leadership, but those words are really help us put it in context of what mayors are dealing with when they try to move these things forward, that there are some serious roadblocks, and thank you for taking those on. Mayor Martin, do you want to talk about what's happening at Stamford and some of the challenges, but also what you're doing right now to try to enhance access to broadband? Thank you.
Turn the button on. And actually, I start usually in these conferences, and I've done this before, and and now we're picking it up with you and the mayor and Josh a little bit earlier. Our species, not just those in Connecticut, and not just for the last 10 or 20 years, but for the last 10,000 years, the success of the civilizations has been hugely connected to the connectedness that they established through transportation systems. And whether it's the Egyptians and how they moved up and down the Nile, or the Phoenicians, or the Portuguese, or the Spanish, or the Dutch, or the final world power through their maritime capability, the English, it's been a central factor in civilization after civilization, is how did they get physical connectivity. And in this country, we saw such things as the Erie Canal and the Transcontinental Railroad. And it was so important that the Transcontinental Railroad, which we often forget, was started during the Civil War. And the Eisenhower interstate highway system. Just huge, important things to the future of our capability. And when we say that this broadband and this now, and if you will, we are moving from just a physical connectedness to an electronic or virtual, or you pick whatever words you want. It's a different type of connectedness, but I believe, as we've heard from you and the mayor and Josh earlier, that is in fact the future. And our economic success, collectively, individually, however you want to describe it, depends upon our ability to establish a connectedness that transcends for everyone. Yes, that's true. But there are a number of complications in here. And some of the complications are that the technology is changing so rapidly. I don't fully understand the difference between 5G and 4G, not just from the cell tower, but from the capacity to, from a user standpoint, and what it means in terms of investment risk. And I will tell you, governments are terrible at understanding investment risk. Governments are terrible at trying to predict future technology innovation. We're just awful at it. And this field is full of that. And so as we look forward, there's this complication in that we have to have broadband access, but how we do that in a world where, if we look, we see numerous cities over the past couple of decades who've made investments, and those investments have largely turned out to be dollar sinkholes for those communities where their investments have not paid off, have not made the connectivity. So we're struggling, I'm struggling, with how to make this work, because I believe that at some point, and maybe we're here already and we don't all realize it, or maybe it's still a little bit away because the technology is changing so rapidly, but I believe that much of what we've already talked about, there is, at some point, we're going to decide that instead of building 3 roads, one for company A, company B, and company C, there should just be 1 road. And maybe we'll have some special toll lane for people that don't want the traffic or whatnot. We could argue about that. But fundamentally, only 1 road, and only 1 gas line, and only 1 water line, and only 1 electric line. And the question is, how are we going to get there, which would be better, not just, it's not so much a battle between the private companies and the municipalities and the counties and the states. It is, how do we figure out a system that works better so that we improve our economic competitiveness and our access. In Stamford, I will tell you that we are an extremely diverse city. I have suburban rural areas with some wealthy people, but the cost per mile to install new fiber or whatever it is that it takes is astronomical. I've got very dense commercial interests, and I can tell you, although we think it is all the same, what NBC needs for its fiber and internet connectivity is actually different than what the trading companies need. And there's a huge amount of money being spent to get exactly what the media companies need versus what the trading companies need versus what Electric Boat might need in a different part of the state. Their concern over security through these things, trumps anything, I hate the use of that word, anything that we have in other places, and it's hard for us to understand. My focus has turned a little bit more towards how do we provide wireless. And that's what people expect, and how do we make it ubiquitous? so that any place in the downtown area of the city of Stamford, if you walk around, you will have high-speed wireless access. And one of the things that I'm still confused about is how fast is 5G or 6G or 72G going to change those equations versus Wi-Fi or alternative other types of wireless connections. Now, what we've been doing in Stamford is we've been putting in fiber to all of our utility, our street lights, and obviously within the downtown area, that's pretty dense. And there is a vision of the possibility that all that could be connected and provide a ubiquitous wireless connectivity experience. Now part of the confusion is with the new Pura rules. I've got 17 different companies all saying, hey, can I get access to this pole? Can I get access to that pole? And the question is that we already have the wireless, we already have the pole. Maybe that's of great value to them, so maybe I could make some money to help offset the expense of our infrastructure. Maybe I should be working on requiring them in some way to provide a ubiquitous wireless experience. But I will be bluntly honest. It is very hard, very daunting to figure out. I know where we need to go. I just don't know how fast we're going to get there. And I understand the complexities of a very complex marketplace that is changing rapidly. So I'm not certain I answered your question, Beth, but I will tell you it's important, and the interest of the various parties are oftentimes in conflict. How we get to some place where everybody has good access that does whatever they need, and at the same time recognize that what NBC and what Bridgewater or needs, or what a person needs in their home, and maybe a telecommuter needs something different than a person who's primarily there for educational or primary for entertainment purposes. This is a complex question, and I don't claim that I have all the answers.
Yes, and I'm sure it's very complex in Stamford. It's a complex economy you have going there, and you have NBC and Comcast as major employers in your district, and they're supplying a lot of the current broadband in the state. I mean, at least up here, it's the only way to get on high
Charter
speed.
communications is quite important to us.
You have
as
Charter
it is.
as well.
Although they're not providing service in Stamford, I would like them to do that to get some more competition. But
Right.
Nonetheless, yeah, it's very complex. Thank you.
Yes, and I appreciate you mentioning the complexity. I think that sometimes, again, mayors have very complex problems in front of them. They only have control over so much. They get blamed for things that go wrong, and they don't generally get credited for things that go right because someone else is claiming that.
Oh, I think we all.
Yes, you all agree on that. And you have very different ecosystems, as you explained. Mayor Leclerc, do you want to talk about what's happening in East Hartford?
Sure, I'm happy to. My focus and my approach is going to be a little different. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my community. We're a community of about 52,000 people. Our top taxpayer is Pratt & Whitney Aircraft and Coca-Cola Bottling Company, along with an educational facility in the town of East Hartford. And we have a diverse population with a lot of underserved people on the lower end of the earning capacity scale. As a mayor, I was elected in 2011, but I was elected to ensure that I could champion a community of 18 square miles that was fully built out with less than 4 acres of land left for development. So how do we grow the grand list? How do we set a path for our community? And how do we bridge that educational divide that is so apparent within our community? We were happy, and I was not knowledgeable in any capacity about the GIG project that was going on in New Haven, but I was reached out by Kevin Lembo, who asked me if the community of East Hartford would be interested in joining in on that. Did a little background research on it. We realized that we had a community that was roughly 50% residential, 50% manufacturing and commercial based, and that we probably provided a good demographic for looking into this with the city of New Haven. That being said, we sent a representative from the town of East Hartford down to work with Mayor Harp and her staff to be part of that RFP that went out. And that RFP yielded actually 2 responses, Macquarie Capital and Sci-Fi. And for some reason or another, it politically didn't move forward because of the model that they were proposing by Macquarie Capital. Now, a little bit about me and the town of East Hartford. I don't stop working forward because of political brakes that are put on me. And I also will not stop advocating for the betterment of my community and what we need. And yes, there are insurmountable things that happen when we're going down this path. But we ended up reaching out to Sci-Fi. They came in, and I don't do this alone, believe me, I don't speak this jargon, this is not my thing. But we reached out we have Connecticut Center for Advanced Technology in our community. Our town council we talked about, and they were very super supportive. In the audience here today is Mike Walsh, my finance director, AKA anything that needs to get done. Because we have a very small staff. I have 13 directors, that's all we have to manage our budget. And also in the audience today is my new CIO, Roberta Pratt, who is not a full-time employee of the town of East Hartford, but through a series of beliefs that we need to better have staff that can easily understand this as a shared position between the town of East Hartford and the Board of Education. We believe there's a lot of capacity that can happen with bringing her on board. So now you'll know a little bit about that. So we reached out to Sci-Fi and we had them come in and we were very intrigued. We actually took the RFP that didn't go anywhere and modified it for East Hartford, and we issued it for the town of East Hartford. Sci-Fi was a responder to that, as well as Frontier. We had an independent panel review with them the opportunities that could be experienced with fiber and what they could bring to a community like ours. And we told them under no circumstances do we have any money to commit to this. So how do we advance? They presented Sci-Fi to me. We met with them again, and actually Sci-Fi intrigued us, and we have started down that path. We got the council on board, town council. We also entered into be a beta site for Sci-Fi. We have a signed contract with them. We also have selected the locations within town buildings where there would be connectivity centers. We also have signed a smart city agreement with them, and we are looking forward to advancing that and continuing to bring broadband to East Hartford. There are some political issues that needed to get around, but Sci-Fi could get around that. Sci-Fi is going to be trenching. We don't need the gain on the poles. We're going to micro-trench through the town of East Hartford, and we're going to make that direct connectivity to every single household and every single business. The wire that they'll be putting in will have an infinite, we don't have to worry about whether we'll have enough bandwidth. It will have infinity available to it. We're hoping, and we hope a lot, and sometimes things don't go our way, but we have done everything we can up to this point to ensure that we can move forward. They did an independent study as to market analysis. We had a great response to our commercial and manufacturing community, and because we are a distressed municipality labeled by the town of East Hartford, our residential side was a little low on the uptake. I'm going to try and fill that void with getting grants so that we can ensure connectivity, grants and through foundations to connect that connectivity to every single household in the town of East Hartford. We're going to continue to fight for this. We believe it is what is needed, not only in East Hartford, but throughout the state of Connecticut. And the moment when I think about how much money is invested in Connecticut to draw manufacturing, biotech, and I think, Beth, you talked about that, and how we as a state are going to compete in the global world, how we're going to compete in the United States. You know what, to think that people that, that politics is stopping the very infrastructure of what is needed to advance our state, I find very disturbing. And it is a complicated source, and it's a political source. I know that I am not going to be well liked by the current providers of broadband. I am anticipating some political pushback, but I don't work for them. I work for the residents of my community, and I'll continue to cheerlead for them. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you. That was powerful. And I think when we talk about political opposition, I think it's companies who are concerned about their profits, and that's their job, to try to protect their profits. And it's the mayor's job to stick up for consumers and Consumer Counsel and others. So I think there's a healthy tension going on. And I'm sort of amused that sometimes when it comes to this issue, it's the more progressive folks who are pushing for really a conservative argument of competition, of having some healthy competition to try to hold down prices. So it's a fascinating, to me, reversal of usual positions. I listened to all three of you, and all three of you agreed that this is a strong community need. And I think you might all agree that it's sort of an emergency for Connecticut. Our economy's coming back. We've been traditionally, a suburban state in some ways, and financial services economy that's been shifting to have more manufacturing, more bioscience, more IT startups. Certainly in New Haven is one of only 2 cities in New England that is growing you and Boston are the 2 of the fastest growing cities in New England. Mayor Harp and Stamford would be in the top 5. So you have a special place, but part of that is the new economy that you're embracing. Yet we have this emergency. I know my son works for an IT startup, and he needs to be able to work from home sometimes. And he can now do that because there was competition introduced in the town of West Hartford. He couldn't do that before, and your people face the same thing. So for your community members and for parents whose kids have to do their homework at home, this is an emergency. You all agree that it's a community need. So how can we as a state work together with the mayors to help move this forward and merge those two? There are really 3 things: the political challenges, the emergency, and the agreement on a need. So how can we all work together? Mayor Harp.
Well, I think one of the things that we can think about, the state has already invested in the nutmeg system, and it has invested and those connect our schools, our fire, and other other uses for our city. What we need to be able to do is to leverage those resources, and we're trying to do it in New Haven, but we need the resources to do it, I think, statewide, to leverage those so that we can begin to then look at doing as Stamford is doing, retrofitting our lights so that we can use the fiber to inform the Wi-Fi and make that available to some folks free. I know that a lot of our commercial providers say, oh, we make it free, it costs $9 a month. It's very, very slow. And in all honesty, if you work a part-time job and you're making minimum wage, you might not be able to afford that. And so, or afford it consistently. And you may not be able to even afford getting computers for your young people. I'm looking at Curtis Hill, who for the past 20 years, through CFAL, or Concepts for Adaptive Learning, has been trying to get computers into the homes of poor people in our city and a couple of other cities for a while, but lost state funding. So to the degree that we could find ways to provide funding for that type of thing, to get the ability to connect to already state fiber that exists in our town, so that we can then find ways will be cheaper for us to then roll it out to our our homes and to our businesses. Those are some ways that would help.
Can I just follow up on that question when you say funds? So wouldn't the most helpful thing be kind of a pool of bond funds with some guardrails to make sure that we're not creating totally different systems, that we're creating some kind of system where towns could work across town lines? How do you envision it?
Since it is a part of the infrastructure, I think bond funds would be appropriate. But there also have to be funds available, and I don't know whether or not it's in our school budgets or if it's in our library budgets, so that people who can't afford the basic computers and those kinds of things have a way to get those. And I know that previously there was some funding in budgets to do that. And especially for our poor communities, I believe that those kind of resources are necessary, and a way to assure that the access is, if not free, almost, for the lower speeds and those who are challenged to pay.
Yeah, and I think mayors have been real champions for public libraries that have been filling in the gap for people, but again, their transportation and timing issues. Kids are still doing papers home on their phones on 3G because they can't get to the libraries, but I do think our towns have done a super job there, and the state does need to do more. The libraries have suffered cuts that hurt their ability to do this. Mayor Martin, do you want to respond?
So, before I got this mayor gig, I was a senior partner at a small firm, and I handled all of the technology and communication stuff. And we needed extremely reliable internet, not reliable like, the trading companies needed. I didn't need the low latency that they need, but I couldn't have it down 2% a month, which was at that time Optimum Cable, whatever their name was at the moment, LightPath, had a service that was very inexpensive, but it was down too often, and it had pretty good speed. I also could go to AT&T, and this is a little bit dated for those of you who know, and I'd get I think it was a T1 line or something like that, and it cost a frickin' fortune. And it was pretty fast, and I couldn't ever determine if it ever went down. We had a hurricane blow through, and the power was out, but I think my line was still good. One of the things I was trying to do is that how can I change that cost economics? And it turned out that there were ways, but the building wasn't, I think they used the word lit. So it was lit for one service, but not another. And so it was kind of whoever got there first. Whoever got there first basically had all the customers in the building. And for me to go get a much better service at lesser price, the other service would have to draw lines into the building. And so basically they wanted me to spend $10,000 so that I could get a lower rate that might pay off in 7 or 8 years, which would provide an enormous benefit to all the other people in the building. But of course I couldn't get the other people in the building and didn't have the time to convince them that they should all chip in to buy this service. So what's the point of this story? I believe that as I sit as a residential customer now in North Stamford, I have one provider. They draw a line directly into my house. And I don't believe that there are other, even though there's some ads, nobody really has anybody but this one provider because they were there first. And it becomes almost impossible for anybody else to come in as the second player. And that first player is holding on to technology that may be a little bit out of date, which is kind of connected. They are charging prices that are probably higher, and they are paying off the risk that they made, 15, 20, 10, I don't know how many years ago. So they're making a nice return on that investment, and it's hard to get a second company in there. It's even hard for the municipality or the state to come in there, because we'll be doing the same thing. We're pouring lots of investment in for very little return. It is a huge economic problem, whether it's the private sector, the public sector, any sector. And what's also going with that, just to complicate it further, my address book now has lots and lots of people in it where the home phone and the cell phone are the same number. Now, I'm holding on to my old line. I just refuse to let it go. But I'm wondering if we actually need connections into our homes anymore. Within 3 or 2 or 5 years, is the connection from the home going to disappear? In which case, the real issue is, how do we get a big fat pipe running close enough to my home or to my small business or to my big business, and it's one pipe that all the ISPs can do an offering on, and because they have better service or because they have a better offering of whatever it is they're offering, they compete. But we have figured out collectively it's cheaper to have one pipe rather than to have two, or to have one person only on one pipe, which is basically monopoly. And so I come to this tentative conclusion. The state, and I can't do it as a single municipality, I can try, but I'll spend a lot of time spinning my wheels, needs to figure out how we can create a system which is in fact very similar to public roads, very similar to electric utilities, very similar to the gas lines. We can get one line running pretty close to all the residences, and whether they are high-end residences or whether they are some of our public housing, it gets pretty close, and multiple ISPs can use that line. There won't be huge charges for them to use that line, hopefully, but they will end up competing with one another. Back to your point you raised earlier, they will compete with one another to provide better, cheaper, more reliable service to the customers. And I don't know how to do that, Beth, I don't. But I think that's the critical path, is how do we get to the point where there is one pipe that everybody can compete on and everybody has access to.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective, and it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense if we could.
Well, I don't know how to do
if we
it, so,
could
but I
get
hear
there,
you
but-
were reelected, so go
but-
do that.
Yeah, we'll work on that. But I do think there's a place for the cities to come together, and when one of the big problems, and I know the mayor Sharon is here, that they're having out in more rural parts of Connecticut, is it doesn't make when something's built by the private sector and they can't make a profit doing it in an area, they don't do it there. And we had to deal with this in the United States with the post office. We had to deal with it with the electric system. We had to deal with it with the roads. But the irony is that as we have people trying to build out, they can't. Right now, sort of the poles are the access to the single. Like you got to get on the poles, and the biggest barrier now for the past 20 years, very successfully through just being a complete pain in the butt, the incumbent providers working and the electric companies have made it very difficult to build out that single pipe, even if communities wanted to allow competition. I know certainly in West Hartford that was the mayor's thinking. No one thinks the government's going to run the company. We believe, all of us, it'll be a competition for service and quality, which isn't that what we all want? But the incumbents don't really want that because they currently have close to a monopoly. So it's a big challenge. Mayor Leclerc, do you want to talk about what the state can do? And this is an emergency, and as I listen to you, it feels like you're treating it as an emergency. You're going to trench warfare. You're just building trenches to get this going in East Hartford. It seems like you're saying we're going to do whatever it takes. So,
Well,
what
government
can the
isn't
state
nimble.
do? No,
They're not
it's
responsive.
Right.
They actually, I believe that we're pushing to be a beta site, and I think it will pave way for other municipalities to follow suit. There are going to be challenges, and I'll share with you what makes micro trenching so attractive. And I can't articulate it to people that are in this world, but I can tell you that in 2017, our 911 system went down when a Mylar balloon hit the wires on the poles, and it took down our 911 system. To us, it was immediately, we didn't know how to respond to that. We couldn't even figure out what had happened. We were able to transfer over our 911 calls to Connected City over to Glastonbury to pick up, and finally we're able to bring it back online and bring it back. Micro trenching is quick, it's seamless, it's clean, it can happen very quickly. The fiber can loop around and go right to the house. We don't have to deal with the politics that are being created, and sometimes government needs to stay out of things. And I think that where they could be effective is to bridge that financial divide through not necessarily the bond funding for the project, but the money that can help connect students to access and make that part of the state educational budget so that we can provide the services to every person regardless of their ability to pay.
So using sort of education as the foundation, because that's in every part of a community is what you're saying. But you
We
feel
have
it-
children that come and sit on the steps of our library after hours
Absolutely.
because it's on there so they can have access. No child should have to do that. Every child should have immediate access to the internet. We are working on creating our next generation of employable people in a whole new way of thinking about technology and how that will shape their futures. And yet, we don't even have the infrastructure in place to help them to realize their capacity and their future. And I think I just can't get out of my head why Connecticut can't figure this out. So we're trying as hard as we can. And like I said, this has been a group effort. Thank you to Ellen Katz and Bill Vallee for spending time with us, and Connecticut CCAT. And believe me, none of us, when we first came to the table, had the capacity even to understand this, nor do I still. But I know what I want, and I think it's important for our community. I think it's important for every community. And if we have to be the beta test, we know that sci-fi just has met a lot of obstacles, political obstacles going forward. But they have, Mike, refresh me where they just have started? Fullerton, California. So that's going to be the place to watch because we're next in line. So we're hoping that in 2019, East Hartford will be on the map for that.
That's exciting to be, because I do think municipalities do serve as labs in a way. The challenge in Connecticut is we have 169 of them. So like if it was a county serving as a model, you'd already have a fifth of the state. But the 169 communities make it challenging. Well, one thing that's changed since I got these questions.
Beth, I want to.
Yeah, please go ahead. Of course you can.
That's one of our issues. We don't want a county form of government, but when I use the word, we need a ubiquitous experience. Yes. And so, at least in my neck of the woods, if you live in Norwalk or Stamford, why is everything different? Absolutely. And if you're walking around with some sort of wireless connectivity, why is it that when you're in Sono, you've got one thing, and when you're in downtown Stamford, you got something else? Or when you're riding on Metro North from New Haven, because they want to come down to Stamford to work.
That'll work somewhere.
Well, they also come from Stamford to go up to New Haven to work. But nonetheless, why would your connectivity be different in Norwalk, or excuse me, in New Haven, as it would be in Stamford? And to the point, this is part of the challenge, is 169 towns. I don't know that it works very well from a consumer standpoint. And we want to hold on and cherish our unique powers, but somehow we've got to figure out how to work together to create a ubiquitous model that transcends our individual borders.
I couldn't agree more. It's just that it's very hard to get started. And if everyone was on board and you think, oh, the state of Connecticut can do sort of, I mean, in Kentucky, the governor really made this a priority, and they are laying pretty much what Mayor Harp referred to, which Connecticut has this infrastructure to use, that is the Nutmeg Network. I know it's gone through a couple name changes, so am I calling it the right thing? I can call it that. But I do know that that was part of recruiting Jackson Labs to Connecticut, the fact that they could have access to that. But I also know that the Department of Economic and Community Development is not supposed to use that too much because they don't want to upset the incumbent provider. So imagine, I just think it's the perfect analogy that we have this thing in Connecticut in our pocket to draw companies, to make jobs, but that our state agencies are cautious not to talk about it too much because they don't want to upset big businesses in the state. So this is the complication. Mayor Martin, you talk about the need to work together and the challenges of 169 towns. One thing, as I was saying, that's changed is we have a new governor who understands this industry really well. And I believe, I'm so excited he won because my experience with him over the past couple of months is that he listens, but he also has ideas and a vision. And so I think he takes it into account, but I know that IT for our state company, IT companies, drawing them here, keeping them here, is a big part of his vision for the state. And really, I'm a preschool teacher. I'm really a toddler teacher, so I'll bring it down an even lower step. And when that entrepreneur came to me and told me about this problem in Connecticut, even I understood what this meant in terms of the drag it was creating on our economy. I mean, it's sort of like I picture a race car with the parachute out is where we are in Connecticut, with the idea that we have this infrastructure throughout the state with a point in every town, and we're not leveraging it. And then we complain that the economy isn't doing what we want it to do. So if you could tell Governor Lamont one thing about how it could help your city and our state on this issue, what would you tell our governor? I'm going to start with Mayor Leclerc, and then I'll come back this way. So you can, I'll let you go. If you want, you can go last and wrap it up, Mayor Martin.
No.
Okay.
I honestly don't think I can boil it down to one thing because,
Keep going.
because I truly
Keep
believe that it will provide the next generation of our workforce. Our economic development will certainly evolve itself with a better fiber and higher speed fiber. I believe that a community like East Hartford will see redevelopment opportunities come their way with new technology. I believe our police, fire, and medical responders can be quicker to respond appropriately. I think the educational divide will no longer be that, and we'll have more equality as a result of that, and every child will have the opportunity to reach their full potential. I believe that our communities will be safer as a result of being smart cities. I believe congestion will be able to be hampered down our main streets because they will be interconnected. I believe that people will be able to work smarter. We will be able to have staff that can be more responsive to my residents, and we won't have as many potholes because there's the ability even to identify potholes and get them repaired quicker. We will have a more engaged community. We will have a more committed population who has a government and a community that is responsive to their needs. And as a result, I believe they will be more engaged politically. And I think we need that next generation of political leaders to be evolved and to understand how important issues like this are and how you can work around them and for them. And I think for that, I think we can't boil it down to one thing.
I like that, and I love your "I believe" statements. And as you were saying them, I just thought, "I believe that we will win." You know that, Chair? and I think that with that, there's a reason that's going through. I believe that as a state we can win if we can figure this out. Mayor Martin, you look like you were excited to say something, and you don't have to answer that question if you had something else on your mind.
You added a little phrase, on this issue. What is his most important job on this issue? I mean, he's only got 17 highest priorities. But on this issue,
I think it's economic development.
well, it's economic development is in any event. Part of his commercial success, his business success, was in fact on how the IT stuff that they did on college campuses. And I think it means that he's been thinking about that audience. Now let me make a connection to something that we just heard. It's about a future workforce. And the future workforce, more immediately, is the people who are just coming out of college. And I understand that Stamford is only a microcosm in the state, But since the recession, you can compare what's going on in Stamford compared to what's going on in Manhattan. And both Manhattan and Stamford had a huge retraction in financial service jobs. You know, we lost essentially RBS and UBS no longer are in fixed income security trading. And so they've shrunk dramatically since that crisis. And it isn't that they moved it someplace, they just got out of the business altogether. And so we've been slow to come back. Meanwhile, Manhattan is going gangbusters. Their financial services growth is not much different than what's going on in Stamford and Lower Fairfield County. They're growing in tech. Those tech-capable people. And it is, if we want the businesses to be here for providing jobs, for providing income, providing whatever it is that you want to say is good about having business here, and there are a lot of good things, then we have to have the workforce that they need. And this infrastructure, this broadband and wireless access is part of the implicit expectation of students that are coming out of school. And I believe that our new governor has a better understanding of that. And if you work from the future workforce, it isn't just the millennials. You work yourself back into our college universities and how we're building STEM capability, and then going back into the high schools and on back, and we begin to merge, saying our future workforce is in fact toddlers. But we've got to, I think that's part of his capability. Understand we are building this because David Martin, sitting in his house, wants to watch Netflix, okay? But I'd like to think I'm going to be governor for 70 years, but I am not the future workforce. And if we are going to succeed from economic development, we have to have the future workforce, and that's where we are struggling so difficult, and this is a component, and an important component of having it.
I appreciate that. That's an important perspective. Mayor Harp?
I'm struggling with about 3 or 4 ideas. One is years and years ago in New Haven, because we're an old city, we used to make buggy whips. And when the car came about, that business went out of business. And I think that anyone who looks at life would say it was probably a good thing that it did. And so one of the things that our governor is going to have to do is to say, is it most appropriate to kowtow to businesses when the infrastructure of our state needs to be developed? Now, I heard, I've seen as a mayor, mayors that have this infrastructure in their towns, and their towns grow and develop. Chattanooga, Tennessee is actually asking for more and developing more broadband capacity at higher rates. Kansas City, Kansas is doing that. Those cities are growing. And when you think about the size of those cities, they are about the size of half of our state. And so they're able then to build the infrastructure. Our state is about the size of either Los Angeles County or the city of Houston. And yet we have all of these jurisdictions. I was surprised to find that Mayor Leclerc's city is about the same size as my city. I'm 18.7 square miles. 55% of my city has high-speed internet, over 300 gigabits at Yale. But the other parts of our city really doesn't have that. I believe that it's up to the state to really begin to think of itself as one thing. I had a brother-in-law that said that as a carpenter, the most important thing that he needed were his tools. Well, the tools for the new economy is building broadband, is building the high speed. And if we want to grow as a state, and we want to be the state that we have thought ourselves to be and have been in the past, then we have got to get rid of the buggy whips. We've got to grow the infrastructure so our businesses, our young people, our future can have the tools that they need to be that place. And unfortunately, there are going to be some businesses that have to go out of business in order for that to happen, or to change their model. But it's something worth fighting for, because in fact, we are fighting for our future.
Wow, thank you, Mayor Harp, and I couldn't agree more about that. We forget how small we are, that we really have an opportunity to lead the nation with our innovative workforce and with leaders like these three. And I would take it one step further, which I bet you'd all agree with me, is I think New England needs to band together as an economic development zone for this nation. Because if you put all of New England together, it's the size of some large states. And we have to make sure that some of these issues work across state lines. Boston and New Haven and Stamford and New York are connected in a very big way from an economic development standpoint. So I think even bigger. But I want to just say to Ellen Katz and Josh Elliott, who worked to put this together, you picked three incredibly visionary mayors who have different perspectives. And I think it's important to hear their perspectives because they're listening to their companies and their constituents, and they're really fighting for their constituents every day here. And you can see they have a vision for the future. And we've got to get that together and combine that with the governor, who I believe has a vision for the future that's grounded in a technology and IT system that works for the state of Connecticut. So today you're going to hopefully work together and come up with some solutions for us and ideas and connections between cities and the challenges that we face in Connecticut. So I want to thank the mayors for their participation and for your work every day, because I know how hard you work and how hard it is to be a mayor. But I think the future's bright as I listen to your visions, but it's not uncomplicated. I think it's very complicated, as you can hear, and today you're going to try to unpack some of that. So thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.